Echoes of Solitude. The mission had been a routine one. At least, that's what Captain Cale Hunter had been told. A small reconnaissance mission to a newly discovered planet, designated Fedoris 7. It was a lonely place, distant from Earth, on the edge of known space. The planet was believed to be uninhabited, its terrain unknown but seemingly suitable for study. The Astra V, Cale's ship, touched down on the barren desert surface of Fedoris 7, its dusty red sands stretching endlessly beneath the twin suns. The atmosphere, though breathable, was thin and dry. The planet had once been a thriving world, but now it was a memory, lost in the void. At least, that's what the scans had suggested before landing. But something had gone terribly wrong. The crash was violent. A sudden, unexplained turbulence shook the ship, sending it spiraling out of control. The last thing Cale remembered was the alarms blaring and the system's failure warnings flashing across the cockpit before everything went dark. When he woke, the Astra V was in ruins. The cockpit was mangled, and the desert winds howled outside, swirling the sand like an angry beast. Cale had survived, but the rest of the crew, they were gone. There was no sign of them. No bodies, no radio signals, no life. With only his suit, a small emergency pack, and a battered communicator, Cale was alone. The immediate priority was survival. He salvaged what he could from the wreckage: food rations, a first aid kit, some basic tools, and the damaged comms unit. It was a far cry from the advanced systems he'd once relied on, but it was enough to get by for now. The heat from the twin suns was unbearable, and he found shelter in the wreckage, hoping for nightfall. The nights on Fedoris 7 were cold and unforgiving, and Cale quickly realized he would need to leave the wreckage to find supplies and a way off the planet. But how? It wasn't long before the desert began to change. As Cale ventured farther from the wreckage, seeking anything that might be useful, the desert began to shift. The sand dunes, once endless, gave way to patches of dense, untamed jungle. Towering trees, their massive trunks twisted like serpents, emerged from the earth, their roots sinking deep into the rocky terrain. Thick vines hung from the branches, glowing faintly in the dim light of the distant suns. The jungle was teeming with life, yet it was eerily silent. At first, Cale thought he might be hallucinating from the heat, or perhaps his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, the jungle was real. The temperature dropped suddenly as he entered the dense thicket, and the air became thick with humidity. There were creatures here, strange, elusive things that moved in the shadows, their eyes glowing from beneath the canopy. They didn't seem to care for him, but Cale knew better than to approach them. With no choice but to push forward, Cale began to explore this new environment. He built himself a shelter, using the large leaves and vines to create a crude hut. The jungle, with its rich flora, provided an abundance of food. He discovered that the plants were not entirely foreign. Some had medicinal properties, others were edible, though many were toxic. The key was learning which plants could sustain him and which ones could kill him. As days turned into weeks, Cale learned to navigate the desert and jungle's complex ecosystem. He became a quiet part of it, adapting to the planet's rhythms. The desert was harsh, but it had water, buried beneath the sand. The jungle, though dark and dangerous, offered shelter. The creatures of the forest were no longer a threat. He learned to avoid them, and in turn, they ignored him. But survival on Fedoris 7 was not without its challenges. Strange phenomena began to occur. Storms would arise from nowhere, sometimes carrying strange energies that shorted out his equipment. Cale's communicator was still functional, but it was unreliable, often crackling with static and cutting out entirely at times. He would hear faint whispers in the air, soft voices calling his name, but he knew it was impossible. There was no one here. Or was there? One night, as the twin moons rose over the jungle, Cale sat outside his shelter, staring into the depths of the forest. The glowing eyes of nocturnal predators flickered in the distance, but he was used to them by now. That's when he saw it, a faint light, moving through the trees. It wasn't an animal, it was something human. His heart raced. Could it be? Another survivor? The light moved erratically, as if it were searching for something. Kale rushed toward it, hoping, praying for any sign of human life. But when he arrived at the clearing, the light was gone, and in its place, a structure. Ruins, ancient and overgrown. The same type of glowing energy he had seen in the jungle seemed to pulse from the stones. Something had lived here once. Inside the ruins, Kale discovered more alien civilization that had long since perished. The technology left behind was unlike anything from Earth, crystal-like structures and strange, pulsating devices. But amid the wreckage, Kale found something important, a device that seemed to serve as a communicator, one that could connect to the galaxy's broader network. It was his last hope. He worked tirelessly to repair it, scavenging parts from the wreckage of the Astra V and the ancient ruins. Time seemed to blur together as he labored, knowing that his life depended on it. Finally, after days of trial and error, the device powered up. The screen flickered to life. "Hellos," Kale whispered, his voice hoarse. "This is Captain Kale Hunter, stranded on Fedoris 7. Can anyone hear me?" For a moment, there was silence. And then a voice crackled through the static. "Captain Hunter, we read you. Hold tight. We're sending a rescue team." A surge of relief washed over Kale, but even as he stood there, staring at the flickering screen, he couldn't help but feel something, an odd pull toward the planet. He had survived, yes, but the planet had become a part of him. The jungle, the desert, the ruins. It was as if Fedoris 7 had claimed him as one of its own. As the rescue ship descended through the atmosphere, Kale stood at the edge of the jungle, watching the stars above. He had survived the unthinkable. But what he would carry with him from Fedoris 7 wasn't just the story of how he had endured. It was the eerie feeling that the planet itself would never truly let him go.